It's atmospheric.
It's a little bit like the opening shots of a horror film. One of us should get murdered soon. And I'm the fattest, so it'll probably be me.
The odds aren't in your favour.
No, they're not.
Gary Delaney, thank you for coming.
Lovely.
It's a drunken Saturday night in Cardiff. Yes, and you're here at the Glee Club.
Yes.
Doing your fierce one-liners to a load of hen nights.
Yeah, it's a Saturday night, so it will be a well-run Saturday night in that it's at the Glee, but it's still a Saturday night.
Yeah.
But generally it's pretty well behaved, and they're there to listen to the comedy, because anyone who's too naughty will get thrown out. But
so they're quite good at policing here, are they?
Yeah, I would say out of the British clubs, they're some of the best at policing. I mean, no one's perfect at it, because if you're really strict about who you let in, you don't make any money. But they're about as good as it gets. Yes, absolutely.
I suppose it is the balance, isn't it, between... Have you seen comedy sort of turn into this night out? Beforehand, was it more of they're coming here to listen to the comedy? Has that changed?
It has a little. When I first started seeing comedy in the early 90s, when I was a student, or like when I did sort of the sound desk at the chocolate clubs, and we're talking like 94, 95, I would say that audiences generally were slightly more bookish and willing to give a bit more attention, a bit more leeway, and let the acts go off on one. And I certainly have worked with acts recently who I remember seeing in those days in the 90s, who might be rather slower paced and more unusual, who would rock it in an audience. And one specific act, I worked with him in about 95, and he just smashed it and nailed it and encored it. And then I worked with him a couple of times a few years ago, and he got booed off both times. And the change in that was, partly there was the clubs, but mostly it was audience over time. And I think generally, as something attracts more of a mass market, you're going to get more idiots. That's inevitable, I think. But also, I think when most clubs started marketing themselves on the basis of the disco afterwards and whatnot, that wasn't ideal. But I know that's the nature of the beast. But
I mean, is there a disco afterwards? Is this how it works at the Glee?
I don't think there is at the Glee. Okay. No, the Glee is much more. I'm not going to name names or diss people I work for.
No,
but there are other clubs that are more about.
Oh, absolutely. Disco. I think we all. No, I think we all know. But you haven't struggled as much, because obviously the nature of your comedy is one-liners and...
Yes, I suit the short attention span modern society. I was chatting with someone about this the other day. I think one-liners go in and out of fashion, like all other types of comedy do, and they're relatively in fashion at the moment. But I think as well as that sort of cyclical shift, there is a secular shift in that I think one-liners are more popular than they used to be, because they do work better in an environment where your audience maybe doesn't have the greatest attention span ever, or at a rowdy club or at a festival, and they're good for TV as well because they're easy to edit.
Yeah. There's always a demand for them.
Yeah. So,
but I heard somebody said that this whole construct of things going in and out of fashion is actually not as true as people think it is. That there's always that there are always people who are doing one-liners. There's always people doing. And really, it's a construct.
I know what they mean. Sometimes the press can, if 3 people do a thing, that's enough for the press to say that's a trend.
Yeah.
Right? There's always been 3 people doing that thing, whatever it is. However, I would still say that when did Milton and Tim start? What was that, mid-90s? I think before they came along, I don't know of anyone in the UK who was doing one-liners before them. I think it kind of did was swept out of vogue when the old mainstream guys went out of fashion. It kind of was chucked out with the bathwater, and they brought it back.
Okay.
It may just be that I wasn't around in those days, and there's guys I just don't know of, but I can't immediately think of any. I might be wrong. So these things do get overstated by the media because they will make a story out of anything, but there's some truth in it.
Yes, and I suppose typically now, because of the Twitter culture, I mean, it isn't just Twitter. I think it has extended into other things as well. That it's a very short attention span and snappy,
yes,
bite-size sort of comedy.
Yeah, it's a two-edged. I mean, that sort of overall, that sort of shift in society kind of favours what I do, but in some ways, it's destructive as well. In that Twitter and stuff obviously means that people are broadcasting your jokes before people have half the audience have seen your bloody jokes if someone's put them on Twitter or Facebook or a text or whatever.
Yeah.
And that didn't used to happen. People didn't used to see your jokes until you did them on telly.
And plagiarism is much easier.
Just cut and paste.
Yeah.
What used to stop it was that people had to remember and tell jokes, and most people just didn't have that skill. So that was why people could do the same set for 20 years. But once it became the case of paste, that people could just, once one person's posted it somewhere, just cut and paste, or just, then it's,
Do you notice a lot of your stuff being lifted by comics, or
not comics generally? The circuit is relatively self-policing. No, it's just just audiences or something like. The thing is, you can't really get away so much with. You kind of know as a comic, if you do something on proper telly, like network telly, you probably have to drop that bit of material. Although some people say you only have to drop it for a bit, that's debatable depending on, but the general rule kind of used to be, if it was a slower profile program, well, it's only on cable, I'll take their money and I'll carry on doing that bit and no one will notice, right?
Yeah.
And most people would think they'd get away with it, and that's true, except if you do a little set on cable thinking it's fine, only 100,000 people are going to watch that, I don't care. But one of those 100,000 people, it's brilliant, I'll put all those on Facebook the next day, then the effect is disproportionate to the viewing figures and the amount of cash you might have received.
I mean, is it ruined when someone's seen heard a one-liner before? If someone sees that, it's useless to you.
It's not useless, but it's lessened. It will never get the same response again.
Yeah.
And also because most people in an audience will just assume that, like them, you saw that joke on Facebook or Twitter or whatever.
So you've had to up your game. Have you had to make sure?
Write faster, but I still, I still got loads of stuff on my set that I'll be doing tonight that I've done before, or has gone on telly, or has gone on things, or So no, you can mix it up as much as you can, but I'm not industrious enough to outrun the internet. I don't think anybody can.
And you still have, comics talk about having that piece that works. You have a set few that are work and crowd pleasers.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. There's a set is like a football team, I think, in that a joke only gets in when it's better than one of the existing players. So a joke has to kind of break into your 20 and retire one of the old guys. But that does mean that you have some jokes in your set that have been there for years because they just still work, and other ones fade away and get sort of dropped and replaced. So that's how I see it. But you always have to go for a mix. You go for a mix between older and new, or you go for a mix between more crowd pleasy stuff and not so crowd pleasy stuff, So, I need to have to try and find a balance you're happy with. When I first started doing big clubs, I really tried to be quite pure about it. And really, I was quite up my own arse as an open spot, quite frankly. And then when I got into some of these big clubs, I would go and die on my hole. And I soon learned a few lessons. And then, so you reach compromise. So I could be like, right, okay, I'm in Jonglers, but I will do my Israeli occupier joke. And I'm also going to make sure I do a couple of ginger jokes or something, so I don't just get booed off. So
is that
you find balances you can. I think you have to find a way to do what you want to do, but also to get it over. You
can live with yourself still.
Yeah.
Because I suppose there might be a mindset where you've done a set and it goes really well, but you feel thoroughly dissatisfied because you haven't done anything that you wanted to say.
It can happen, but it's kind of your fault when that happens. But yes, sometimes you go to a really rough gig and you're right. There's things I can do to get through this gig and make sure I do well and do my time and get paid, but you're not always happy with some of the things you do. But if that's too often, you're probably making too many compromises.
But it's a possibility, and you want to be doing what you want to be doing.
Everyone has to start off and put themselves somewhere on that sort of spectrum of hacky to artist, and try to find a little point where you can find an acceptable compromise and make a living, and not I mean, without coming off stage going, what was I doing?
I mean, when you're doing these sets in comedy clubs, is that actually helpful for like your show that's coming up, like Edinburgh? Is that helpful in preparing you for that, or is it a completely different beast when you get to Edinburgh?
Overall, it is helpful. There are many things that you will put into an Edinburgh show that just won't work in clubs, or certainly not in a big weekend club. maybe in one of the slightly sort of quieter, more erudite Sunday night clubs. We might get away with. So just because something won't work in a Club 20 doesn't mean that it doesn't have a place in an Edinburgh show. However, equally, you can use that excuse to put a load of dross into a show.
Yeah.
You know, going, well, it's it'll be good in Edinburgh, it's not, and sometimes, you know, it may just be that it is slightly too clever for a clubby crowd or demands too much attention, or it might just be that it's not as good as you think it is. Now, again, you know, so you have to not try and use that as an excuse. I mean, I'm putting together my Edinburgh show now, and I did my first preview last week, and I just started off with this big pile of jokes, and I was really pleased to see that a lot of the stuff that hadn't necessarily made it into my club set was working in a preview, and hopefully will be in my Edinburgh show and make up a big chunk of it. But also you've got to be wary of, I mean, I know that there was a lot of stuff in my last Edinburgh show that wasn't from my club set, and I put it in and I was like, this stuff zings. So after Edinburgh I was like, right, now I'm going to get out and just do what's basically a cut down version of my Edinburgh show in clubs. Didn't work.
Really?
Yeah, that experiment lasted about a week. And then I had to go through and cut out a lot of that stuff because some of it wasn't right for clubs, and some of it, in all honesty, probably just wasn't as strong as I thought it was.
So there is material that plays well in Edinburgh but isn't actually that strong?
There certainly is, absolutely. But there is also the fact that you can use the slower pace of an Edinburgh show as an excuse to get away with stuff. And you have to not indulge yourself like that too much. There is always a value to doing any gig, or certainly a gig like this, a proper gig like the Glee. You can put stuff in. I've got I always have in my bag a little short list of the jokes that have worked the best at my last couple of new material nights, and I'll go through and whittle it down to like the best half a dozen, and I'll be trying to drop them in at any gig that's good, and find a place to put it in and tweak it and whatnot, and then see if it works. So I know that tonight I've got one joke. I rewrote it a little bit this afternoon. It's been kind of working. I think I've got the right place for it. Over the last couple of nights I got another joke to really bed in and work well that I was unsure about, but now it's working, so I'm going to try and do the same with this one. I think I've got the right wording, I think I've got the right place. I'll drop it in and see what works. So that's, and that, you know, and if that joke works, then it will stay in my set and it will end up in the Edinburgh show, and I'm doing that at the Glee on the Saturday night. But equally often you try that and you come away going, yeah, bye-bye little joke.
And yeah.
But you should always do it. I think every gig, there's always an excuse not to do new material, right? And if you listen to the comics chatting backstage, and you know, we're always finding excuses not to do new stuff. And me and Sals were talking about the other night, looking at the audience, just going, oh, this is what it is, but this could be quite hard, and maybe I shouldn't do all the new stuff. There's always a reason not to do it, but you should do new stuff. I memean, many moons ago, after I'd first left my job, but I had a working 20, I kind of got a bit lazy. I thought, right, I've got this, I've got 20 that works. Yeah, hey ho, I'm in charge. And I would work at that guy at that time. I was still working with guys like sort of, you know, like Mark Watson and Rod Gilbert, you know, who were still for a brief while at the same level as me. And then they were always putting in new stuff and always testing stuff, and I'd be like, what are you doing, you idiots? Don't you realise we're on £80 each here on a Friday night for Mr. Comedy Chops, and you're putting in a new bit? Oh, you're crazy. I'm going to stick with all this tried and tested. Look at those fools. They'll never get anywhere. And and obviously they were right. I was wrong. That was a very clear lesson of those days for me.
Is it always going to be important to you that you can play a club like the Glee, or do you think you'll get to a point one day where you might, you know, not have those skills anymore because you're doing something else?
There are clubs that I might choose not to play anymore if I had you know, sufficient employment alternatives. The Glee wouldn't be one of them. I think there is a virtue to being able to play any room. I say any room, that's an exaggeration, but I think it's good for your skill set as a comic to be able to play the majority of rooms that you come across. There will still be some that you can't do, but if you pigeon yourself as somebody who can only play arty venues or can only play bear pits, I think that is a loss to your comedy, and I think there's a real virtue to being able to try and do both, or at least as much as you can of both. And I think you kind of get two camps of comics, and both to a degree can be a little bit snobby about, I only do this sort of gig, I only do that sort of gig, and there is a virtue to going, well, how flexible can I make myself, how much in the middle ground can I get that I can do. You know, if I ever do a double up that is a big Stags and Hens club and then nip up to the arts centre up the road for a double, I feel really pleased with myself, you know?
That you've got both of those skill sets.
Yeah, well, I say that. I have, I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, like, to be honest, being aware of my own week, I'm probably more likely to come a cropper in an art centre than I am in a Friday night jonglers. So it's, but yes, it's, I can have a pretty good stab at both.
I mean, is there a slightly snidey thing towards one-liners? Does the art centre crowd kind of think, oh...
Yes, there is a little bit. Yes, I think that's undeniably true. You get some people who just think they're too middle class and well educated for one-liners, and will just, think, you're set up on a punchline. My God, who does he think he is? So yes, I certainly find that I get resistance in some places and don't go that well. But I have a tendency not to do that many of those gigs because I find them harder. But I still do some. But the right approach would be to try and do more and think, well, maybe it's because I've let myself get a bit out of practice at those gigs. I used to be better at the artier gigs than at the rowdier gigs. Now I'm better at the rowdier gigs than the artier gigs because I've done more of them. So there are, when I moan about a crowd, it's usually because it is a load of tutting middle-class Guardian readers, usually somewhere in the south of England. But they're a really important audience, and they're quite close to an Edinburgh audience, so you've still got to be able to play it.
And your audience, is that more of the core of your audience who come to see you?
My audience are dweebs, basically. I did a really nice little preview in Leicester on Tuesday, and I looked out at the audience, and they were mostly... it was like looking into 75 mirrors, quite frankly. They may not all have been the same gender or the same age or the same colour, but they were all broadly of a type, and that type is socially awkward. That type is not necessarily overly concerned about their appearance.
Essentially the same.
Yeah, none of them are fit to babysit. That's probably how I describe my audience.
That's the general rule.
Sorry.
But you have enough of those sorts of people to... you can tour, so...
I'm doing my first tour at the minute. It's quite a little one, because I didn't want to... I think some people in recent years have made the mistake of jumping straight in with a big tour, which I think is a bit silly. So my first tour is not that many venues, and they're all quite small.
Modest.
But that's why I'm saying first tour, because hopefully... when that's like May and June, hopefully by the end of that will have gone all right, and then I do Edinburgh, and then I would hope to do a second bigger tour off the back of that. But I'm not going to jump straight in with a big tour, because I've watched colleagues of mine do that in recent years and looked and thought, that hasn't worked out as you hoped.
And I think it is difficult. It could be quite easy for you to jump into that because you've got such a following online, I guess.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily translate into... I can't look at that and go, that means I can do a tour of 300-400 seaters.
No,
and it's the same with I've done odds and sods of telly, a couple of little things, but it's not the case now that you do 2 or 3 telly appearances and you go, I'm a big household name, I can do a huge tour. You have to do kind of a critical mass of telly to get that behind you. A couple of mock the weeks or a one-night stand isn't going to have an immediate, overnight, massive effect on you. It will raise your profile, it will get you an audience, you will be able to do a little tour, it will push you up bills, but it's not going to turn you into a household name. There's so much more telly nowadays that a couple of good TV appearances doesn't let your career take off in the way that it once did, I think.
But you probably see a lot of your material used on the big panel shows because you do a fair amount of writing.
Yeah.
Is there a level of bitterness? I don't know.
No, not really.
No, you're happy.
I think when you and on honesty, writing is just work. I look upon writing jobs as kind of the same way that I used to when I organised conferences for them. I'll go in, I'll do my work, I collect my money, and I go home. Writing stand-up for myself and writing jokes for myself, I love, and it's wonderful. And if I never earned another penny doing stand-up, I would still gig. I wouldn't necessarily gig every night of the week, I wouldn't necessarily gig everywhere, but I would still do gigs, and I would still do new material nights and try stuff out just for the love of it. I wouldn't still write for TV programmes for the love of it. That's not to say I don't enjoy it, but that's work. And I think when you start off doing writing jobs, you have to a degree, learn to let go of what you write. You go, once you've written it, it's not yours anymore. You've sold it, and that's gone. Don't get too hung up on it, because you're never going to agree with. They're never going to use what you think are the best jokes. They're probably not going to use them the way you want them to. You're never ever going to be happy with it, and it's not your choice. You've sold it. That's that. You have your own. When it's you do it yourself, you have your say over everything. So that's enough to say.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
And enjoy your gig.